Some stereotypes die hard, and none is more persistent in our common imagination than the idea that Americans are all a bunch of rude and vulgar loudmouths who look down on other nations for being more fragile than their beloved homeland. This is of course a gross misrepresentation of the friendly and pleasant nature of United States citizens, who, besides those residing in Philadelphia, are for the most part lovely people. However, it doesn't stop fiction writers from perpetuating these cliches. Adam Dudley from Kengan Ashura being a perfect example, as he's seen comparing mayonnaise to cum in a classic sexist/homophobic joke for his very first apparition in the manga. His background as a backyard fighter partly explains his roughness, as being an on-the-road brawler isn't the most sophisticated of occupation, a fact that Dudley, who looks like an actual Street Fighter character, embraces entirely, having made a living out of going from state to bash people's heads in. At only 28, he's already covered in tattoos, including 2 scores on his cannonball delts and a multitude of crosses and religious symbols decorating his biceps that look to be bigger than his head. He puts all that mass to good use, and his arms aren't just for show. There are similarities with bazookas not stopping at their size. The man known as the Emperor seems to possess an impossibly powerful blow, potent enough to send another grown man flying and pulverizing the cars he landed on in the aftermath. That attack literally reshaped the bone structure of Adam's unfortunate opponent, putting him out of commission in a flash. As the commentator states, this is damage equivalent to getting hit by a truck, except that in this case the vehicle doesn't pull over afterwards to mock your mangled corpse, a practice that Dudley gleefully engages in, confident that no one in the crowd could pose a serious threat to him. From what the panel shows, whatever move he used was so heavy that his feet sunk into the concrete, a detail that will have its importance later. Such a dominant fighting force represented a prospect too tempting to pass up on for a company participating in the Kengan tournament, and he was therefore hired to represent Boss Burger, which is pretty much the non-copyrighted version of McDonald's. The author really leaned heavily into all of the available stereotypes surrounding Americans, to the point that I was almost surprised to not see Dudley make his way to the ring with a United States flag draped around his shoulders. At a weight of 107 kilograms, at a height of 192 centimeters, he isn't necessarily an outlier in terms of size, but his anatomy really stands out from that of other competitors. First off, his arms and shoulders are ridiculously well developed, only being topped by those of Julius in terms of size, and Kuroki in terms of definition. The traps and neck are also massive, and his chest is nothing to scoff at, but the real strong point of his physique is his core, with the Texan top dog rocking a bulging 8-pack that occupies almost the entirety of his rather large waist. He's got the typical top-heavy build that we would expect of a power striker, a visual information that his opponent didn't let go to waste, making sure that the fight would be taking place on the ground. As dominant as they might be on their feet, brawlers lose a large chunk of their KO ability when their back is on the ground, as the power of the blows mostly comes from the hips, making any attempts at throwing a punch ineffective. As stressful as receiving punches without being able to move can be, it doesn't seem to have much of an effect on Adam, who still gleefully flashes his grill in his opponent's face. He's got 40 kilograms on him, so it's not surprising that punches from the mount position wouldn't be able to knock him out, especially considering his background as a traveling street fighter who had to face other heavyweight sluggers to make a living. That chain of granite would prove almost uncrackable, but there is a limit to how much damage one can absorb with their face, and Dudley's bravado doesn't change the fact that he's still in an inferior position that he has no way to escape from. Despite that, he didn't hesitate to throw a punch, which is a catastrophic mistake to make against a grappler, who can easily transition this overextension into a choke or armbar. This is especially true here, considering that Adam's foe is Imai Cosmo, a genius jiu-jitsu master who never misses an opportunity to submit an opponent. But instead, he elected not to go for it, and decided to give up his mount position to escape the blow entirely. An illogical choice considering how weak a punch thrown without any kinetic power should be. And yet, choosing not to block this attack was the right decision, considering the amount of damage it caused simply by grazing him, So how? How can an attack that looks by all metrics to be completely powerless result in such a fright? Well, the explanation comes from the profession that Adam Dudley occupied before becoming a full-time street fighter, that of an official player in the NHL. It might be surprising to hear that a professional hockey team would want to hire a hothead like him to appear on their main roster. But one, the sport is more violent than football in certain aspects, and two, there exists a position called the enforcer, whose only job is to violently punish those who try to have a go at the team's star players. These hit jobs are not perpetrated with sticks and are codified in the rules as a valid mean of playing the game. Once a target has been acquired and provoked, the refs will organize a confrontation between the two players that will constitute in a good old-fashioned fistfights, a prospect that sounds bloodier than it really is, considering that throwing a solid punch on ice is impossible. Or at least that's what everyone thought before Dudley made his apparition in the rink, knocking guys out left and right, with his impossibly powerful straights, and leaving a sea of corpses in his wake. Keep in mind that this was done on skates, with his bare hands, and that he didn't even bother aiming for the chin, and preferred to just let it rip straight through the opposing team's players' helmets. That insane destructive power comes from his abnormally well-developed trunk, with the muscles of his core and lower back being several times thicker than that of a normal human male. Paired with his oversized arms, this superhuman disposition allows him to throw haymakers powerful enough to score a KO, even without using his lower body to launch the punch. Whether this characteristic is a natural-born talent or something that he built through years of skating on ice is unsure, but what we know for certain is that the transmission of energy from the floor into his blows is made several times greater when he's on solid land. It also explains this aberrant ability of his to get up from the floor by grabbing the ground with his feet, his trunk being so rigid that he can do a full range of motion sit-up with only a slight bend of the knee. Not only does it look incredibly creepy, that gimmick must also be highly discouraging to witness for his opponents, who give it their all to knock him unconscious just for him to rise from the dead like a buffed up zombie. And not only that, but they also must deal with the fact that, regardless of the amount of strikes they land, Dudley can score a comeback with a single blow. We're talking about a man that can KO other heavyweight enforcers wearing padded helmets while being on skates. One of his jab is enough to make grown men faint. Now imagine taking a serious punch from him, at full throttle, to an unprotected area when he has perfect footing. This would be the equivalent of getting hit by a truck, which is exactly what happened to his unfortunate street fight opponents. Imai Cosmo would soon get a taste of that otherworldly power, when his lightweight body would be sent flying into the air by Dudley, bouncing on the floor like a rubber ball under the power of the swing. Blocking doesn't do much good either, the strength of the attack being so severe that they pass any guard and cause direct damage to bones and vital organs. In terms of pure striking power, the only other fighters that might be able to rival the Emperor are Wakatsuki and Julius, and what Adam lacks in speed and technique, he makes up for with his roughneck spirit and physical capabilities. His ice stick shot, a move directly inspired from his hockey career, is essentially an overhand right on steroids, potent enough to send an enemy ricocheting from floor to the ceiling. And when you see what happens to a body that gets hit by one of his regular right strikes, the prospect of receiving that attack full on without vomiting your entrails on the spot is slim. This is what happened to Cosmo, who didn't even have the chance of getting projected out of range by a lucky bounce, and who got straight up pinned into the ground by the hit, encasing his corpse into the dirt. On top of that, he got struck in the back of the head, which in terms of survival rate gives him about as much chance as getting up from that than surviving a Mortal Kombat fatality. Dudley, who was quite frustrated by his opponent's attempts of taking the fight to the ground, would continue pummeling his lifeless and shattered body to his heart's content, until the referee stepped in to stop the bout. By that point, Imai, who is not known for his ability to tank damage, should already be long dead. That would only be, of course, if what we had been shown so far had been real. In truth, the fight was already over the second Adam landed the high stick shot, but not for the reasons announced earlier. The reality is that he was hallucinating from the lack of oxygen, having been put into a submission hold by the jiu-jitsu artist. This man, the youngest fighter ever to enter the Annihilation tournament, embodies all of the effectiveness that grappling moves can have in MMA. A story that you can find in the description, and that I will be expanding on in another episode of MURICA, dedicated to his skills and physique.